So we've got about 20, 25 minutes for questions. We'll open the floor and we'll ask, if you could, before you ask a question, just say briefly who you are. It's great to see that we haven't got plastic bottles, which are the bane of Hong Kong here, because we're right in front of a Division of Environment Sustainability. So that's good. I've been at many conferences in Hong Kong where it's all about plastic bottles. I'm going to take the privilege of asking the first question, Eric, after your very inspiring speech. You talked about this being the age of cities. My colleague Gideon Rachman in the Financial Times, he had an interesting article the other day basically saying that the divisions in today's world are not really so much between countries, you know, between the US and China, but actually between cities and the rest. And you've got this sort of extraordinary situation where you have liberal urbanites in places like Hong Kong or LA or New York have very different views from rural America, small town America, or small town China or rural China. How are we going to get around those divisions? As you say, cities are these great sort of wonderful melting pots and so on, but how do you deal with that situation, which essentially got Donald Trump elected?
Well, look, I gotta unmute this.
Yeah, no worries.
So, testing, can you hear me? Yep,
Yeah,
great.
that's good, thanks.
Thumbs up. So, that's a wonderful question, and it is the heart of the matter in many ways. I think I'd say two things. One is I believe those divisions are overstated, and that just comes from my travels. Everybody is linked with a local community where they live. And when I go to a place like South Bend, Indiana, it's the home of Notre Dame University, about 115,000 people, folks there want to see a vibrant Main Street with really interesting shops, with things made by local folks. You know, somebody said to me, it's not just in Beverly Hills or in Manhattan where we want to have a boutique. We want to have one here too. We just are struggling with how we could sustain one in a smaller town. We want to be a part of that excitement. We want to have cafes. We want to learn you know, from each other. I think that there is much more common ground, but you're right in terms of where the economic activity is accelerating much more, which is in those winner cities that I was mentioning, the great global winning cities versus the ones that are being left behind. I think the best way to deal with that is to be able to figure out a model for urban revitalization that comes to those smaller towns. And I'm engaged with that. I started a new nonprofit called Accelerator for America. And we're going specifically into those kind of marquee cities and talking to them about what we can do with extraordinary leaders, mayors who are friends of mine, who are making those investments. In South Bend, just to stay with that, Mayor Pete Buttigieg is this amazing mayor. He's in his 30s, very dynamic. Studebaker, remember the old Studebaker cars when there was the big four in America? The Studebaker factory was there. And it's just lying there, vacant. But he's begun to fill it in with a high-tech park. Because it lies between Chicago and Detroit, it's very important for fiber, and they're laying down fiber. They're looking at ways, essentially, to catch up with this global economy and the needs of this tech moment. I was in a place in Iowa called Waterloo, where John Deere farm equipment is made. Still the best farm equipment in the world in this small town. And they have one of two centers to do very cutting-edge three-dimensional printing that is helping us have parts for our fighter jets and bombers because you can't buy them off the shelf from the 1950s anymore. And this is in a very kind of rural area surrounded by farms. So I think we just have to not buy into the idea that these places don't have potential. And then finally, we have to also not stereotype each other. You know, I think people are much more tolerant and inclusive in those small towns and rural parts of America than people write about. And vice versa, we're pretty conservative in big cities about wanting good schools and family, you know, families that are together. I'm a conservative when it comes to families, which is why I don't want Donald Trump taking children out of the arms of their mothers when they come across the border. So I think it's a little bit overstated and overplayed, maybe.
Thanks. And we hope those 3D printers aren't used to make guns.
Yes,
There's a bit of a controversy at the moment, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Right, so first question, gentleman there. There are some mics coming to you. And just briefly introduce yourself, and thank you. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, my name is Sing-Ming Shaw, former resident of Los Angeles. Is Los Angeles, indeed, the entire country will become more polluted under the new EPA currently run by lobbyists?
They won't help us, but no, they will, at worst, take away some of the national contributions as we continue to bring pollution down no matter what. In Los Angeles, we've reduced pollution by 90% since I was growing up. In our port, depending on which pollutant, by 95, 80, or 50% with SOx, NOx, and sulfur oxide, nitrogen oxide, and particulate matters. We have our own government that is multi-city, multi-county, a regional government called South Coast Air Quality Management District. I've shared this model at a speech I gave at the University of Peking a couple of years ago when Beijing and other cities that are really choking on the same pollution we experience in Los Angeles were looking for solutions. Last time I was in Hong Kong, it was a very, very brown day when I was here, and I'm sure you still have some of those, even though they've been reduced. We have an EPA that will not be a partner as much now, but to my speech's main point, cities are the drivers of all of this stuff. Whether it was President Hillary Clinton or President Donald Trump, it still comes down to us to do all this work. Cities are in charge of building codes and how green buildings are built. We, in our case, own our own municipal utility, so we generate our own electricity, and we've pledged to stop making any electricity from coal by 2025, to be off of even natural gas and 100% renewable in a city that, thanks to Los Angeles Business Council, which is here with us, is the #1 solar city in America now. We are building 15 new light rail lines, as I mentioned. So the national government can't take that from us, no matter what, nor should they. But yes, it would be nice to have a partner that would add the additional 5, 10%. And what they're doing with the coal power plants, I think, would be very destructive to take away the rule that President Obama implemented.
Thank you. I mean, there's a lesson there for one country, two systems. You know, Hong Kong could actually take the initiative as a city to do things for its own environment that would be maybe ahead of what is happening elsewhere in China, although I don't know if that's the case at the moment. Yep, right at the back there, second row from the way.
Hi, Nicholas Gordon. So I hope I'm right in thinking that cities like Los Angeles and New York do not have offices overseas like Hong Kong does. But if a city like Los Angeles were to open kind of representative offices overseas, what areas of international affairs would you kind of carve out and put under their remit?
Right. Well, we do have presence in Asia and overseas through tourism and investment offices. I think we have 4 or 5 now in China. We have probably about a dozen of them around the world. Now, they're not diplomatic missions. We're not engaged in the work of political agreements. But I think it's not too far down the line when we will be. I'll give you one example of the kind of work we should be engaged in. When President Xi and President Obama made their historic agreement about being able to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions in both China and the United States, one of the planks of that said that cities in China and the United States will come together to talk about this. I was so excited, I called the White House. I said, all right, when is this happening? Where is it happening? How is it happening? They said, oh, we don't know. You know, presidents sign these things and then we figure them out afterwards. So I said, great, let Los Angeles take the lead and we'd love to host it. And working with our Chinese counterparts, the White House said yes to us. We raised the money, and within a year, Vice President Biden came. We had his counterpart here in China, counselor to the president, and we hosted a dozen mayors from the most important cities in China with a dozen mayors from the most important cities in America at the first U.S.-China Climate Leaders Summit. Now that might sound like, oh, that's nice, you all got together. No, listen to what happened there. That's where Beijing and Guangzhou announced that they would cap their emissions in 2020 instead of 2030. It was the biggest agreement in the world before the Paris Climate Accords. And we had, I think, something like a dozen bilateral and trilateral agreements where cities signed things together. It's an interesting moment for international relations, right? The national governments, of course, take precedent, but we're not prohibited from signing some sort of binding or semi-binding agreements between each other. So I think the environment, smart cities, transportation, that's what I'll be speaking to the chief executive about, global health, those are the main areas I think that cities should engage with. And of course, trade. We don't set the trade rules, but we can greatly expand the trade even as the rules are being kind of rethought, pulled apart, fought about, etc.
Yes. It's all from Your right, my left so far, so maybe somebody over here should come up with a question. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Michael Gallagher. And how would you describe the health of democracy in the Los Angeles
In Hong Kong or
area?
Los Angeles?
Yes, yeah. Since you're visiting from Los Angeles, I thought I'd ask
In
about
LA.
Los Angeles.
Good.
And
More of an
presumably
expert.
it's very unhealthy at the national level for a variety of reasons, including 400 families or wealth interests dominating outcomes and purchasing outcomes. But I'm wondering if the picture is different at a more local level.
Well, democracy is alive and well and under attack, is how I describe it. You know, I think Americans are very resilient that when democracy itself is attacked, we respond. And I hope that more people are going to come out and vote this year. At the local level, people are happier and people participate less. It's a funny thing that democracy, participation usually goes up when people are more upset, and it goes down when people are happier. One thing that I do think is a long-term worrying trend is that for younger people, they're kind of confused about democracy, and we don't teach civics well. Democracy doesn't just come naturally to human beings. Argument does, freedom does, but engaging in democracy in an effective way has to be taught. In the same way we teach our children to engage with their own conflict, between two kids. How do you settle a dispute? I mean, these basic things. And instead of having adults who are teaching our children, we have children who are leading our adults right now. And a tantrum-based democracy is not a way to govern.
I love that phrase.
Press,
That's very nice.
tantrums against people, and tantrums against the truth. I mean, what is worse than that? But I do see hopeful signs of, I'll give you a couple examples. More women are involved in running this year than we've ever seen before, and becoming activists. Many of them, my stripe, the political side of the spectrum, as Democrats, in places where, to your earlier point, we've written them off because we had this stupid thing that happened on television a few years ago where graphics allowed us to start painting and coloring in states as one color or another. So red ones don't get any attention, or red counties. So I was talking to Beto O'Rourke, who's running for Senate in Texas. He went to a town in Texas where he said nobody running for Senate, either Republican or Democrat, had visited since 1948 when Lyndon Johnson was running for Senate. Because it was red, so the Republicans wrote it off, it's safe. The Democrats wrote it off, why should I talk to anyone? And people were so happy to talk to someone. That, you respect what I say, you want to hear from me? So I think that's what's missing, the listening of democracy. I've never won an election by talking, I've only won them by listening. And I think we have to get back to that and teaching people how to best engage. So I'm optimistic this year for the outcome, but we have to have a 10 or 20-year plan of putting this in our schools and demanding it from our folks.
Thanks. Interesting what you're saying about participation. My daughters complain about Brexit because they're British, and I said, you better make sure you register to vote,
Right, right, absolutely.
because you can't complain if you don't vote. Somebody over here, come on, there must be somebody with a question. Yes, the lady there.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm Li Yao from China Daily. So you talked about cities working together with more collaboration.
Yes.
And here in China, in this part of the region, in recent years, we have been talking more and more about the Greater Bay Area,
Yes.
involving Guangdong, Hong Kong, and Macau. I wonder whether you have been to Guangdong, any cities in this Bay Area other than Hong Kong. So what do you see the potential of this city cluster strategy? Because there are plenty of useful and successful experiences from American Bay Areas, including New York and San Francisco. And also specifically because you are sitting in front of banners about environment and sustainability. So what do you see this city cluster can help to address environmental issues?
Yeah.
And also I have another question about immigration, because both
I can only retain 3 things, so this is the
Right.
limit. This is the limit.
Okay, thank you. So I'm sure in the United States,
Yes.
immigration is a heated issue.
Yes, I've heard
Here
that.
also in Hong Kong, because it draws very opposing views, and people have strong sentiments about it. And a lot of those sentiments is against the Chinese mainlanders. So what would you suggest the more rightful values people should hold about the potential immigrants. Okay,
Thank you. So basically,
Great.
Bay Area corporations, how do they work and how should they work? And immigration, I think those are the two.
Environment and
Yeah.
and what cities I've been to. So last time I was here, I was in Guangzhou, our sister city. Los Angeles and Guangzhou are sister cities, and I went to Shenzhen too, because we have a lot of business with Shenzhen companies. BYD has its America's headquarters in Los Angeles. We're working with folks like Hazen Group and others on real estate projects that are in our downtown Los Angeles. So we're very closely linked throughout this region. And I was so excited to hear about the Greater Bay Area Council, is it, or Greater Bay Area Association that is forming. I do believe that cities lead, and cities are usually chopped up into smaller pieces than the actual city. So the city of Los Angeles is 4 million people. But I also wear another hat, because the county of Los Angeles is 10 million, so I do all the transportation policy for the county. I'm the biggest and kind of most prominent elected leader in an area that if you go beyond that one county, with no break, there's no rural area, it becomes 12 million with the counties that are right around it, and still no break, it's really 18 million people living in a single city together. So Los Angeles is 18 million people. When I talk about it being a $1 trillion economy, third largest in the world, it is a region. And similarly here, now it's pretty continuous people in a region that the Greater Bay Area is what, 70 million or something? 60? So the key to, I think, cities doing well is putting down your territoriality, of figuring out a way to collaborate. It requires chief leaders, like people like myself, to not be too arrogant. You know, all the cities in Los Angeles always love to hate the mayor of LA because we're 40% of the population, but 95% of the headlines. So like, why are you getting all the attention in the newspaper? So I have a group that I convened the first month I became mayor to bring all 88 mayors of Los Angeles County together 4 times a year. They love it, they get heard, they get listened to, and then I can help lead in Washington, D.C. or our state capital, Sacramento. So I think that coming together is very important. On environmental issues, it's critically important as well. I mentioned our South Coast Air Quality Management District. That is a region-wide government. In Los Angeles, it's very confusing and occasionally effective, but mostly confusing. We have 30-something levels of government that are independent from each other. Our city government is different than our county government. Our county government is different than our school district. It's its own government with elected leaders. Our community college district is different. Our water quality district is different. Our air quality district is different. If you have a mosquito problem, there's an independent government called Vector Control that takes care of mosquitoes and rats. I hear there was a rat outbreak here in Hong Kong earlier this year. So, you know, we found that region-wide there are many problems that ignore borders, so you have to construct government around the problem, not the problem around government. And then the last question on immigration. Look, it is very important, I think, to maintain borders. No entity can exist without that. So I'm not an open border person. But when I was talking about open borders before, we need to have much more thoughtful immigration policies that focus on the economic needs, the family needs, the security needs, and the market needs, I think, of an area. In the United States, we have none of that. We have the most impractical immigration politics I have ever lived through in my life. Now, they're very effective politically. You know, President Trump gets people really scared that it's immigrants that are taking jobs away and that they're the problem of everything. But in Los Angeles, immigrants are our strength. 61% of our new businesses are started by immigrants. Elon Musk was an immigrant who may or may not have come through the country legally. His brother claims they were undocumented. He claims they had a visa. Who knows? But anyway, he might have overstayed the visa. But think about what we would have lost if Elon Musk had gone someplace else. So we need a pathway that takes people out of the shadows. I'm a very practical person about this, despite being also the grandson of immigrants from Mexico who was undocumented, I guess, back then, if that term existed, who volunteered for his country in World War II, got his citizenship as a result. I mean, imagine if he had been ripped out of his mother's arms the way President Trump was doing just a couple months ago when he crossed the border in Texas 100 years ago. I wouldn't be here giving this speech today. It would be Nina Bachigian, which would be great, you know. She'd be the mayor of Los Angeles, but
We're all
so
immigrants.
it's all our loss. So maybe
We're all
immigrants'
immigrants.
fault. But and then last thing, just for here is, you know, I think, look, there's two competing interests in Hong Kong, if I can wade into it, which is how much can the city sustain? It's definitely a place of economic opportunity, but if you don't plan a city, and immigration has to fit into that migration, for housing, for the environment, cities are on the brink of that anxiety. The anxiety part is that they're almost out of control.
Thank you. We're pretty much out of time, but I can't let you go without asking about LA and the cult of the car. Is it ending? Is it changing? We all know, LA is essentially a low-rise city except for the center. How is this evolving? How will it evolve? I mean, here in Hong Kong, we have pressure groups that are trying to make pedestrianization. Many people in Hong Kong, because it's a very dense city, unlike LA, use public transport, and yet a lot of the city is still designed for cars, which is kind of bizarre, including stuff right here in front of you.
Right.
So is it finally changing in LA, or is it ever going to change fundamentally, or is it just going to become electric?
I think it'll change when the technology of cars change. It is changing some. It used to be when we turned 16, we wanted to get our driver's license. It was our rite of passage. Now I think for young people, your rite of passage is getting your cell phone, so you don't care if you have a car. Because that cell phone is the passage to freedom, and getting Uber or Lyft to pick you up. And, really turning 16 is about freedom. Now you get it in a different way. We are investing heavily in allowing people to have options outside of cars, but right now the car culture is alive, well, flourishing, and we're trying to improve conditions for cars at the same time. I do think when I talked about the three-dimensional revolution that's about to hit, what's been primarily two-dimensional, it's really in transportation. Our ambition is to make Los Angeles the transportation, technology, and innovation capital of the world. Because if I tell you what city in the world is that place, we don't have it yet. So between new ways of tunneling, Hyperloop, vertical takeoff and landing, electric drones that will carry people, which we're going to be one of the first 3 cities in the world to pilot, the way cargo moves, et cetera. We're on the brink of revolution, but the biggest one is going to be the interconnectivity of vehicles. At that point, it's not really cars the way we think of cars, because it's not human beings and our slow brains working. It is potentially the end of traffic deaths. It is capacity doubled or tripled on the road network overnight, because cars don't have to go like this, they can just go like this. In Los Angeles, 94% of the time cars don't move. And I don't mean they're stuck in traffic, they're parked, and only 6% of the time a car moves. That's highly inefficient. Downtown Los Angeles, 40% of it, the geography is for cars to be parked. That's not a good use of downtown real estate. 97% of fuel doesn't turn a car's wheels. It is wasted. That's inefficient. And even in peak traffic in Los Angeles, peak traffic, which is the worst in America, more than 90% of our streets don't have a car on it. So if you have technology that can better, Waze attempts to do that, but better use that, you could double, triple the capacity overnight through autonomy and interconnectivity. So I really think that's the revolution that's coming much more. It'll kill off individual car driving, and then car driving will become a hobby. It'll be more like a motorcycle that you kind of, hey, let's take it out for a drive up the Malibu coast and have a nice day.
Thank you so much. I think we've run out of time, have we? We have to, the mayor has to go and meet Chief Executive Carrie Lam, so I'm afraid we have to end it there. I've been told to be very strict, so if we can all give a big hand to Mayor Garcetti. Thank you.
Thank you.
Actually, I studied the PPP, which stands for Public-Private Partnership here, and sometimes these partnership works, and sometimes these partnership fail miserable. I think in today's lecture, actually, I learned new meaning of the acronym PPP, which stands for People, Partnership, and Prosperity. I think that to make the long-term prosperity, actually, we have to have a new form of a partnership, but also have to bring people in. I think this is a very important lesson. Thank you very much. So let's put a round of applause for Mayor Garcetti, and also our moderators, Mr. Mallet. Thank you very much for coming, and I look forward to seeing you in our next event.